The Buffalo Bills made their biggest outside free agent acquisition to date with the signing of wide receiver Curtis Samuel. We're going to break down the move from every angle today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Well, folks, welcome in. Very excited to break down the newest Buffalo Bill, Curtis Samuel. We're going to break down this player from every angle. We're going to talk all about who he is, what I like about the move, what I don't like about the move, the impact on the offense, the impact on the draft, the impact on the compensatory pick formula. We got a lot to get to here today as we break down a fairly significant move. I wouldn't call this a major splash, but a pretty sizable contract handed out to Curtis Samuel. So the Bills signed wide receiver Curtis Samuel to a 3-year, $24 million contract. It's worth up to $30 million with $15 million guaranteed. Curtis Samuel's 27 years old. He turns 28 in August. He's 5'11", 196 pounds, 31.25-inch arms, 9.5-inch hands, and he ran a 4.31 40-yard dash when he came out of Ohio State back in 2017. That's a great 40 time. He's an explosive dude. 4.31 40. Back in 2017, he was a second-round pick out of Ohio State, the 40th pick overall in the draft by the Carolina Panthers. And yes, Brandon Beane was the assistant general manager for the Carolina Panthers when that selection was made. So obviously, Brandon Beane very thoroughly scouted and studied Curtis Samuel and was part of the regime that picked him, so he should know him quite well. If you remember Curtis Samuel at Ohio State, he was a fascinating player. He came out of high school as a running back, and he goes to Ohio State, and he's like a running back, wide receiver hybrid player. For his career at Ohio State, he had 172 rushes. He had 107 catches, right? So very multifaceted playmaker. And when we were all evaluating Curtis Samuel for the NFL draft, there was a lot of debate as to what his NFL role should be. Is he a running back? Is he a wide receiver? Wasn't necessarily super polished at either, but you just knew that he was a dynamic playmaker. And I think a lot of people just got tired of the debate and just said, put the ball in his hands and ask him to make plays because he's an explosive guy. Obviously, he's developed into a wide receiver in the NFL. He's gotten some carries for sure, but he's a wide receiver. His first 3 seasons in the league, he spent with the Carolina Panthers, his last 3 in Washington. So after he finished his rookie deal, he signed a 3-year, $34.5 million deal with Washington entering the 2021 season. Now, looking throughout his career production for his career, he has 317 catches, 3,383 yards, 22 receiving touchdowns across 7 seasons. His most recent years, last year in Washington, 62 catches on 91 targets for 613 yards with 4 touchdowns. In 2022, 64 catches, 92 targets, 656 yards, and 4 touchdowns. His best season came in 2020 with the Carolina Panthers when Joe Brady was his offensive coordinator. He had 77 catches on 97 targets. That's 851 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns. He also had 200 rushing yards on 41 carries and logged over 1,000 yards from scrimmage. So back in that season with Joe Brady in 2020 in Carolina, 118 touches, 1,051 yards, 5 touchdowns. So we talked about his raw statistical data, but I want to get into the metrics a little bit. I think this is even more interesting. 52% of Curtis Samuel's NFL snaps have come from the slot. 52% from the slot, 45% as a out wide receiver, and then 3% came from a running back alignment or a tightly aligned wing alignment. So there's some thoughts out there. Well, is this a slot player? Well, he's a slot player, but he's also played plenty outside, right? 45% of his snaps outside. So there's some interchangeability with where you can play Curtis Samuel. For his career, he averages 4 yards after catch per reception. Honestly, I thought it would be a higher number just based on who I know Curtis Samuel to be, an explosive guy that is dynamic with the ball in his hands. I thought he would have more production to show for himself post-catch in the NFL, but only 4 yards after catch per reception. His average depth of target is also pretty low. For his career, it's only 7.6, and even when you go back to the year he spent with Joe Brady in Carolina, 7.5 yards was his average depth of target. So not a guy that's had a ton of opportunities to catch the ball down the field. I want to talk about that in just a moment. But he is somebody who teams have prioritized getting the ball into his hands quickly. And a big reason why is because he can create quick separation. Next Gen Stats put out a very interesting metric for us to reflect on. It says Curtis Samuel averaged 9.08 miles per hour within the first second of his routes in 2023, which was third quickest in the NFL among receivers that ran at least 300 routes. So that's pretty cool, especially when you consider that the Bills receivers last year averaged 7.95 miles per hour within the first second of their route. So 9.08 for Curtis Samuel. The Bills averaged 7.95. You get a little bit more quickness in this wide receiver room. Also, Cover One put out a cool stat for Curtis Samuel. Last season, he averaged 3.3 yards of separation per target, which is an incredible number. Think about that. When targeted, the nearest defender on average is further than 3 yards away from Curtis Samuel. So if you're looking for a guy that can create space, very clearly Curtis Samuel is a guy who does that. He has a career drop rate of 7.6%, and that's pretty solid, but it's been even better the last 4 seasons, under 5%, 4.4% drop rate over the last 4 seasons. That's outstanding. Contested catch rate, and look, you don't add Curtis Samuel at 5'11", 195 to thrive in contested situations, but he's fared pretty well for himself. A career win rate of 45.2% in contested situations, 50% over the last 4 years. Now, Curtis Samuel hasn't had a lot of opportunities to contribute as a vertical down the field receiver, but when he's had chances to do that, he's been very effective and very efficient. Over the last 4 years, Curtis Samuel has been targeted deep 29 times, which means 20 yards or more down the field. 29 times he's been targeted 20 yards or more down the field. He's brought in 20 of those targets. 20 of 29. That's an efficiency of 69%. That's outstanding. Kind of gets you excited to feel like there's more to unlock with his game, with some more opportunities to win vertically, because when he's had those chances, he's been very, very successful. Now, one other thing that you have to point out with Curtis Samuel is that he has really had no stability whatsoever in his NFL career when it comes to offensive coordinators and quarterbacks. 7 NFL seasons, 5 different offensive coordinators. Just think about that. The guy that is calling plays for you, that is designing an offense for you, that is getting familiar with you, you've had no stability there. 5 offensive coordinators in 7 years. And then he's also never really had stable quarterback play. When he first got to the NFL, Cam Newton was his quarterback, and Cam Newton's a good player, but that was right when he was just getting injured all the time, was never available. So it was more Kyle Allen and Teddy Bridgewater. He goes to Washington, and it's Taylor Heineke and Carson Wentz and Sam Howell. So for Curtis Samuel, it's probably pretty exciting for him to not only be reunited with an offensive coordinator that knows him, that was able to help him produce his best season, but also to play with a quarterback like Josh Allen. Makes you wonder, maybe there's just a little bit more to unlock with Curtis Samuel compared to maybe what we've seen to this point in the NFL. All right, folks, in just a moment, we're going to talk about what I like about this move, what I don't like about the move. We'll get into the impact on the wide receiver room, the offense, the compensatory pick formula, the draft, all kinds of stuff. So be sure to stick with me. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or the one seed, it's time to go dancing at America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel, because right now new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Little fun fact for you here. Curtis Samuel's first NFL catch came against the Buffalo Bills. It was a 9-3 win, and it was a game that I was actually at. It was in Charlotte at Bank of America Stadium, and the Bills lost that game 9-3, and Curtis Samuel got his first ever NFL catch. All right, so if you're well acquainted with this podcast, you know that sometimes I like to attack conversations by simply asking myself two very basic questions. What do I like about the whatever it is, whether it's a game or an acquisition, and what do I not like? And so I want to take some time right now and answer that question for you. We'll start with what I like, and I think the answer is pretty simple. I like playmakers. I like explosive playmakers, and that's what Curtis Samuel is. A guy that can give you yards after catch ability. A guy that has the type of speed that a defense has to respect. I like that. Of course I do. And I like how that's going to help Josh Allen. You know, for as much as we love Josh Allen's big arm and his ability to push the ball down the field and his ability to win outside of structure, for Josh Allen and all NFL quarterbacks, winning from the pocket still is the most important thing. And what Curtis Samuel can help with is that, particularly when it comes to the quick passing game. Think about the way that defenses are playing in general in the NFL, and especially against quarterbacks like Josh Allen. They're giving offenses and Josh Allen soft shells, right? Split zone coverage. It's all designed to take away throws down the field and limit explosive plays. Defenses know that it's a lot harder for an offense to score if they have to stack together 9, 10, 11 plays and execute consistently, as opposed to they get a big chunk of yards, right? It's very obvious, but your likelihood of scoring on a drive where you get an explosive play is much higher than if you don't. And so defenses are all about taking away the explosive plays. And so it's not as easy to just rip the ball down the field. Where you find explosive plays is in yards after catch and getting the ball out of the hands of the quarterback into the hands of playmakers that can create and produce big plays in other ways other than just throwing the ball down the field. You've heard Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott multiple times already this offseason talk about that. You heard Sean McDermott say you need a guy that can catch a pass for a 0 or 3 or 5 yard gain and can take it 10 or 15 or 50 yards. And so I think this is a player that's going to help provide explosive plays, but help Josh Allen be able to win in those moments where he relies on the quick passing game, that he can put it into the hands of Curtis Samuel because he can create that quick separation and can create after the catch. That's going to be really, really important. I also like the familiarity with Joe Brady. We've all been the new person, right? You go to a new school, new job, whatever you've done in life. Curtis Samuel's the new guy on the Buffalo Bills, but he comes in with a relationship with Joe Brady and probably a fair understanding of some of the concepts and plays and schemes that he has in mind. I think that gives him a leg up to come in and help this football team. I also get excited about the versatility and variety of the personnel groupings that the Bills can have offensively. You think about their 11 personnel package, which is 1 tight end, 1 running back, 3 wide receivers. Your 3 receivers are Diggs, Shakir, Samuel, then Kincaid at tight end and James Cook at running back. That's pretty good. I like that as a group of weapons around Josh Allen. Your 12 personnel, which is 2 tight ends, two receivers and one running back. You have Diggs, and then you can go Shakir or Samuel with Knox and Kincaid and James Cook. Not to mention you have Mack Hollins, who's this 6'4", 220-pound wide receiver that you can sprinkle in and mix and match personnel. You can create some fun bunch sets. You could put in a bunch set Mack Hollins, Dalton Kincaid, and Curtis Samuel. You can just really stress defenses with a lot of variety with skill sets. I like the variety that this Bills weaponry has in terms of speed. They got some size, ability. They had some route runners, right? There's a good mix of skill sets here that intrigues me quite a bit. So I like a lot of the dynamics and layers to the offense that Curtis Samuel provides. Now, what do I not like about the deal? First of all, there's just a piece of me that wants to make sure that Khalil Shakir's role is not diminished at all by the arrival of Curtis Samuel. I love Khalil Shakir. I love the skill set. I love the trajectory. And I want to make sure that he remains at the forefront of this offense for being a fairly high volume player. I want to see him getting 80-ish targets next year. And I don't want Curtis Samuel to take away from that. Now, there's room for Curtis Samuel. Don't get me wrong. The Bills have a lot of departing targets in Gabe Davis, Deontay Hardy, Trent Sherfield, right? There's departing targets there. So I think there's going to be some opportunity. But I don't want it to take away from Khalil Shakir because I'm so happy with him as a draft pick and where he's headed on this football team. The other piece of this that you have to be mindful of with Curtis Samuel is that he does have some injuries. Not that he's always injured. Don't get it twisted. But he certainly had some stuff that's forced him to miss time. Has some hamstring stuff. Had a back injury, an ankle deal, a groin injury. He's had some problems here, and some stuff that's caused him to miss several games. He missed the last 6 games in 2017 due to an ankle injury. He had surgery and missed the last 6 games of the season. He's missed a game with a back issue. Missed a good part of the season. In 2021, it was kind of a disaster for him with his groin. He missed time during mandatory camp, and then he had a setback, was placed on IR, missed the first 3 games of the season, and then tweaked it again and missed 5 more games. So he's kind of had some stuff. And not that I think he's an injury-prone player. He's had pretty much 5 of his 7 seasons without really any injury concerns, but 2 that were pretty significant. What I'm getting to is that the Bills are tight when it comes to cap, right? They made a choice to make a fairly sizable investment in Curtis Samuel. And I just want to make sure that when we look back on this deal, we think to ourselves, yeah, that was a good usage of the cap space, right? That this was a player that they made room for, and I'm glad they did. That's what it comes down to. And players like this that are like predicated on athleticism, they like to be able to function optimally. Like they don't want to have a lot of bumps and bruises and issues, right? And so I look back at last year's Bills team, and I feel like some of their bigger dollar contracts just weren't available. And I want to make sure that when we look back and reflect on this Curtis Samuel deal, that being mindful of how tight the cap is, that this was the right way to spend that money. And a big part of that is going to be the availability factor. And so I just don't want to see injury problems pop up during his time in Buffalo, because the Bills obviously are tight on cap space and need to maximize every dollar. And we need to get a nice return here on the investment made in Curtis Samuel. All right, folks, in just a second, we're going to talk a little bit more about the impact on the wide receiver room. The draft conversation, that's pretty fascinating to me as well. Compensatory pick formula. We got plenty more to get to, so be sure to stick with me. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right. No cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024. validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. All right, more to say about this Curtis Samuel move, and I want to talk about the overall impact on the wide receiver room, which is starting to take shape here, right? It was a big concern that we had entering this offseason. Gabe Davis is a Jaguar. They cut Deontay Hardy. Trent Sherfield is now a Viking. And so you had Stefon Diggs and Khalil Shakir and a bunch of futures deals. Well, now they've added Mack Hollins. They've added Curtis Samuel to go with Khalil Shakir and Stefon Diggs. I think that's 4 of your rostered receivers. And the Bills last year rostered 5. I think that's probably where they're going to want to be again this year, which puts you in a pretty good spot. Again, Diggs, Samuel, Shakir, Hollins, those are 4. And then right now you have Justin Shorter, Andy Isabella, and KJ Hamler kind of vying for that 5th spot. And so I think this wide receiver room is starting to come together. And one question that I've asked myself as we've considered the Bills as potentially a team that's going to draft a wide receiver at pick 28 in the first round is, well, what type of receiver do they need? Which one are they going to want? And as you know, wide receivers come in all shapes and sizes and different skill sets. And really what it comes down to is, should we be thinking more about Brian Thomas and Adonai Mitchell as more traditional X receivers that have size, that can win leverage battles, that are physical, that have that down the field ability as well? Or is it more of the Tyler Lockett type receivers like a Ladd McConkey from Georgia or Roman Wilson from Michigan? Like, what's the right way to go? And so in me trying to answer that question for myself, I ask myself questions. And one question that I asked myself was, what was Josh Allen's best season and who was he throwing the ball to? And what receivers traditionally are the ones that he has the most success throwing the ball to? What type of skill set do they have? And I think very clearly to me, Josh Allen's best season was 2020. And in that year, his wide receiver core, not factoring tight ends and running backs, the wide receivers, in terms of targets, Steph Diggs was number 1 with 166 targets. Then it was Cole Beasley at 107. Third was Gabe Davis with 62. 4 was John Brown with 52. And then Isaiah McKenzie was 5th with 34. So 5 receivers there. And if you notice, one of them is a big-bodied size guy in Gabe Davis. The other 4 are more shifty guys that you think are capable of creating that space for themselves. So Josh Allen has been at his best when he's throwing the ball primarily to guys that create great separation. And I go back to the rookie year for Josh Allen, and if you remember, his receivers to start were Andre Holmes, who is like 6'4", 220 pounds, and Kelvin Benjamin, who is a massive. And 8, 9, 10 weeks into the season, both of those guys are cut, and the receivers become Robert Foster, Isaiah McKenzie, and Deontay Thompson, who are more shifty space creators. The point being that Josh Allen is at his best when he's throwing to guys that can create that separation. And I think a misconception out there is that to help a quarterback with accuracy, and Josh Allen's an elite player, but I don't think that he's consistently elite with ball placement, right? I think that's just true about Josh Allen. And there's a tendency for people to think, well, give him a big-bodied, long, towering, massive wingspan, catch radius wide receiver. When in reality, that doesn't actually help. What they really need is a bigger margin for error with a guy that can create space, right? You don't want to just congest the catch point with the guys that can't create separation and then expect them to be able to just outmuscle people for the football. Increase the margin for error with a guy that can actually create the space. I think the NFL is learning that more and more and more. Not that there's not a place for the bigger bodied receivers. I think you should have 1 or 2 of them. But the point that I'm making is I think it's perfectly okay for the majority of the wide receivers for Josh Allen to be not the big-bodied size guys, but to be more of the separators and guys with that separation quickness. And so that that gets me more excited about Curtis Samuel, to go with Steph Diggs, to go with Khalil Shakir. And then, of course, Mack Hollins is now your big-bodied guy. So I like how the construction of this is happening. I think the next thing to get into is, does the arrival of Curtis Samuel impact our ideas for the Buffalo Bills in the draft? Because before this move, I figured next week we'd start talking on this podcast more draft stuff, and I figured early next week we'd get into wide receivers. When I look at the needs of this football team, and obviously there's a lot of information to come, right? We need to know what other defensive linemen they add, what other safeties they add. But I feel like the needs at defensive tackle and defensive end at safety are far greater now to me than what's going on at the wide receiver position. And so I do feel a shift in what I think the Bills' draft priority should be. I don't think their defensive tackle situation is good enough. I don't think defensive end's good enough. I don't think safety is good enough. I'm pretty satisfied with this wide receiver core. Now, there's still room to add. Don't get me wrong. I think they should add. They should draft a receiver at some point. But based on the information we have right now, I find myself much more concerned about defensive tackle and defensive end and safety than I do the wide receiver core. Obviously, it depends on how everything falls. You want to get good value. You want to be mindful of needs, right? There's a lot of information to come. But as of right now, I'm thinking a whole lot more about defensive linemen and safeties than I am wide receivers when it comes to the Bills and early picks in the draft. The next question is, how does the arrival of Curtis Samuel impact the compensatory pick formula? And that's interesting. I know that not everybody fully understands the compensatory pick formula, but generally speaking, it's the net loss of free agents that you have, like expiring contracts that you lose versus expiring contracts that you bring in. If you have a net loss, the NFL will give you draft picks. And the Bills get a 4th-round pick this year for Tremaine Edmonds. They didn't sign enough players to offset the loss of Tremaine Edmonds, so the Bills get a 4th-round pick. Going into this moment, before they signed Curtis Samuel, the Bills were scheduled to get a 4th-round pick for Gabe Davis, a 5th-round pick for losing Leonard Floyd, and a 6th-round pick for losing Dane Jackson. According to Over the Cap, who tracks all this type of stuff, the signing of Curtis Samuel to an $8 million average annual salary contract, that does cancel out the 6th-round pick in 2025 that they were scheduled to get for Dane Jackson. So still on track for a 4 and a 5. The 6, not so much. Real quick, I do want to shout out some Bills, some now ex-Bills that are in new places, and I think several of these guys found themselves in great landing spots. Tyrell Dotson is now a Seattle Seahawk. That's a perfect spot for him. Their linebackers are like the ones that they had last year are on other teams. Bobby Wagner's with the Commanders. Jordan Brooks is with the Dolphins. I think Tyrell Dotson has a very clear path to start in Seattle. I think that's a great spot for him. Poona Ford goes to the Chargers. That makes perfect sense to me as well. I think he's got a chance to start for them. I've always viewed Poona Ford as a starting caliber nose tackle. They've moved on from some of their interior defensive linemen. There's a clear path for him to start. Tim Settle goes to the Houston Texans. They signed him to a 2-year, $7 million deal. No idea what Tim Settle has done to earn a deal like that, but congratulations, good for him. The Texans just traded away Malik Collins, who's one of their better interior defensive linemen, and I think that creates the opportunity for Tim Settle to factor into that rotation. And then Trent Sherfield heads to the Minnesota Vikings. Not sure he's going to have a big role there, but one thing that's true about Trent Sherfield is that as an undrafted free agent, he's never been cut and he's never been on a practice squad. And so he just kind of continues to figure it out. I'm sure he will with the Minnesota Vikings. So there you have it. Analysis on Curtis Samuel, the newest Buffalo Bill wide receiver. A lot of layers to the conversation. Certainly an intriguing addition. And I certainly hope that we look back on this signing and feel like Brandon Beane absolutely did the right thing amid the very tight cap situation that the Buffalo Bills have. All right, so this is probably our last conversation this week. If there's big news, I will absolutely get to it. Otherwise, we'll catch up again probably on Sunday afternoon or at the latest Monday morning. So regardless of whenever the next episode is, just make sure you're subscribed. That way you'll know when it happens. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.